What's going on, everybody? In this episode, we're going to be talking about pinball games for the Sega Saturn. Now, there aren't a ton of these games on the system, but the system does have a handful of really good and really unique games. We're going to be looking at 8 games total. Let's get started. Our first game is Digital Pinball Last Gladiators, released in mid-1995 by Kaze, or Kaze, or I don't know how the hell to say it. This was one of the very first pinball games I played on the Saturn, and it's still one of its best. Released in all major regions at the time, it has 4 different machines to play at the start, each with its own graphical style, sound effects, layout, and theme. The soundtrack to these games are awesome, with various rock styles mixed in with ambient speech and effects to really drive home its unique presentation. Gameplay in a pinball game is centered around the design of the board and the physics of the ball, and here is where Last Gladiators truly shines. Each board is designed with a truly fun layout and presentation. They give you multiple objectives and ways to score, and the high-resolution graphics are simply beautiful on a CRT via RGB. The physics are great too, with a realistic roll and bounce that feels just like the real thing. It's never unrealistically fast or floaty like many video pinball game offerings. Perhaps the best part of this game is the crazy low price it sells for. I often see the game sell for under $10 for the North American and Japanese variants, with the PAL region's digital pinball equivalent going for not much more. If you have a desire to explore some video game pinball on the Saturn, this is a great place to start. Its low price, great presentation, and great selection of tables all make it a class act in the genre. 2 years later, an update to the game was released, titled Digital Pinball Last Gladiators version 9.7. This was an updated version of the game, released in extremely limited quantities. It's much rarer than the original release, and has a number of changes to the physics engine to make it feel a bit more realistic. It's more expensive than the first release due to its rarity, and has a new case design as well. The presentation appears nearly identical otherwise, and since the first game played fine to begin with, this curiosity is more of a collector's item than an upgrade. If you run across it cheap, it's a nice piece to have for the library, but the first one is more than good enough to satisfy your pinball needs. Pro Pinball The Web, or just Pro Pinball in North America, was released in mid-1996 and developed by Cunning Developments. This one has some really strong elements to its presentation. The game looks great, with impressive detail and color, and it really does look like an actual machine on your screen. The audio is great as well, with an awesome driving soundtrack and sound effects that mimic the real thing extremely well. The gameplay feels good too, with solid physics and an impressively smooth speed. Unfortunately, the content does not live up to the presentation at all. You get one board and that's the entire game. Video pinball needs a few different themes to break up the action, as staring at one layout and listening to one soundtrack quickly becomes boring. The challenge of this one will keep you playing longer than most single-screen games, but it simply does not compare to some of the other offerings on the Saturn in terms of content. Fortunately, this one is inexpensive, and if you must have every pinball game on the Saturn, picking it up complete won't leave you mortgaging your house. Kyu Tenkai Fantastic Pinball was released by Technosoft in mid-1995. This hand-drawn and animated 2D pinball offering is absolutely gorgeous to behold. No joke, man, this one has tons of animated pieces going on during gameplay, with even multi-layer backgrounds thrown in for good measure. It's so colorful and has so much going on, the game is almost distracting. The game is broken up into 3 play areas: Hell, Earth, and Heaven, with each presenting its own challenges and layouts. Gameplay here isn't realistic in the slightest, and nor does it try to be. It's whimsical and lighthearted, and instead of bumpers and ramps in the playfield, you get skeletons, half-naked women, crabs, angels, and waterfalls to score your points. Don't let any of that fool you in regards to its challenge, however, because this game can be rather difficult. The unconventional playfield often causes the ball to move quickly in directions you do not suspect, causing easy losses of your turn. Though the game does have a few minigame levels you can find during play, it lacks content overall, meaning that the replay value in the long term simply isn't there. It also isn't a cheap game for the genre, easily going upwards of $40 for a complete copy. As a curiosity that has great presentation though, you'd be hard pressed to find its equal on the machine. In mid-1996, the Victor Interactive Software developed Pinball Graffiti would get an exclusive Saturn release in Japan and Europe only. This fully 3D polygonal rendered game lacks the smooth, gorgeous visuals of some of the other pinball games on the Saturn, and has a far less impressive soundtrack as well. What it lacks in presentation, however, it more than makes up for in gameplay and table design. You get 3 tables here, each with a different theme, soundtrack, and layout. Gameplay is solid, with the ball feeling very realistic in its physics, having a satisfying weight and bounce as it moves around the board. Bonuses are easy to string together too, meaning that the game rewards extended play and understanding your objectives. While it's not up to the standards of the titans of the genre, I really enjoyed this one overall. The game tends to be more expensive in its PAL format, so go after the far cheaper and readily available Japanese release. Early in 1996, the Saturn would receive the Digital Illusions developed True Pinball. This one here is a direct opposite to the previous game Pinball Graffiti, as the presentation is top-notch, but problems with the gameplay keep it from being top-tier stuff. The 4 tables given at the start all look great, with large amounts of detail and color, painting some truly great graphics on the screen. Even the music and sound effects fit each theme perfectly, and do nothing to take away from the presentation. Things begin to break down during gameplay, however, as the ball feels floaty and moves unrealistically around the board. It feels almost as if you're playing with a ping pong ball instead of a pinball, as the bounce and movement just feel off compared to better playing games. It also has an issue where parts of the board obscure your view of the ball far too often, causing you to be unprepared for it to pop up in certain circumstances. True Pinball isn't a bad game by any means, it just doesn't play as well as it should. I was still able to have fun with it though, and it's far from the worst pinball game I've ever played. The good news is that this one is pretty cheap, especially its Japanese variant. I've seen it go single digits on eBay at times, and for that, it's well worth the money. Late 1996 would bring the NMS software developed Hyper 3D Pinball, or Tilt, across the Atlantic. This game here features the most boards of any Saturn release at 6, all varied with their own layouts, soundtrack, and themes. This game here is loaded with impressive content. It even has some decent graphics, with the board itself having some great color and detail. Only the non-play area outside the board hurts the presentation, often just being completely absent in detail. The music and sound are nothing special at all, but fit each theme well enough. It doesn't drive the action or get the heart pumping like it should though, and if a pinball game needs anything, it's a great driving audio presentation. In the positive category, the gameplay is solid and the physics feel good. The action is fast and the ball moves and bounces as it should. The gameplay is so solid in fact, I can't help but feel just how much better this game would have been with more detail in the outer portion of the screen and a more emotional soundtrack. This one here was on the cusp of greatness and falls short for the simplest reasons. Though it doesn't live up to its potential, it's fortunately very inexpensive. For the meager asking price it goes for, it's still worth picking up and adding to your collection. Late 1996 would see a release of digital pinball Necronomicon from the same team that brought us Last Gladiators the year before. As the saying goes, I've saved the best for last here, and as good as some of these other pinball games are on the Saturn, Necronomicon is simply in a class all its own. The graphics are presented in the Saturn's high resolution mode and look just freaking awesome. The color and detail is amazing, and the game is gorgeous if you have the means to display it properly. Each table has an area that animates during gameplay as well, adding even more to the visual pizzazz. And as good as the graphics are in this one, its audio presentation is even better. My God, is it awesome! There are few games released today that compare to the absolutely incredible feast that your ears will be bombarded with. But don't take my word for it. Let's take a moment so you can listen to it for yourself.
Deathwalker. Darkness has overpowered you.
I mean seriously dude, Saturn game audio rarely has ever been so exquisite. Now that you know your eyes and ears are in for one hell of a ride with Necronomicon, you'll be pleased to also know that the game continues Last Gladiator's excellent gameplay. Everything feels as it should, with the bumps and bounces of the ball reacting just like the real thing. Stages are well designed as well, giving you multiple objectives and always throwing you into position to score or be flooded with additional balls to keep things exciting. So good is Necronomicon in its recreation of the real thing, I have absolutely zero problems recommending it as a must-have purchase for the machine. And if you only buy one pinball game for the 32-bit era, make sure this is the one you get. If that wasn't a glowing enough review for you, you may be enticed by the game's selling price of around $30. A price that is unbelievable for a game of this quality that was exclusive to the system. It was released only in Japan, but fret not, as everything you need is in English, even the menus.
Far away in a dream, moonless. You are beyond the wall of sleep.
You know, while going over some of these games, I really realized that the Saturn has a ton of really good games that you can get for next to nothing. These pinball games are a prime example of it. Now I know a lot of guys come into collecting for the machine and they're looking at the cost of the shoot 'em ups and they're looking at the cost of some of the fighters and the more rare games, and they're throwing up their hands in disbelief at how expensive the Saturn can be to collect for. But the truth of the matter is that the Saturn is still loaded with games that are very affordable, loaded with games that you do not have to break the bank to get. A prime example in this episode is Necronomicon. I mean, that game is so incredibly good. I consider it a must-own for the machine, and it can be gotten for $30 or $40. Really, folks, if you want good Saturn games for a very affordable price, they're out there. All you gotta do is look for them. I am Sega Lord X. I really appreciate you guys watching. I'll catch you next time.